Dantalia, covered in blood and grime, sat panting in a cave, silently cursing and wondering why he had ended up in such a situation. Reflecting on a time before this, he had attended his father's funeral, a man he had always despised who died of a heart attack. His father was a criminal, promiscuous, and greedy, leaving nothing but trouble for him. However, perhaps the only good thing his father did before dying was leaving Dantalia a secret inheritance of 500 million yen. Dantalia cleaned up the apartment and observed the workers going about their day. He was not among them as he was an NEET, an unemployed person living idly. Now he could comfortably continue being a NEET with the inheritance. Dantalia began to dream of what he could do with such a large sum, mansions, cars, and beautiful, glamorous women, but those frivolous things were not his priority. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, his eyes lighting up, knowing what he wanted had arrived. The delivery person had barely spoken 2 words when a figure swiftly grabbed the package and slammed the door. Overjoyed, Dantalia rushed to his brand-new bed, having outfitted his dream bedroom, which had only cost him 30 million yen. He had made a personal vow to adhere to 3 no's: no work, no friends, and no marriage. Work was a curse, even if its absence made him miserable. Friends were annoying and bothersome. As for marriage, the commitment to spend a lifetime with someone else, something his father had denounced at least a dozen times, he had no desire to repeat his father's mistakes. He just wanted to play games on his comfortable mattress, considering this a luxurious life, his own paradise. He turned on the new large screen he had bought, ready to play all the games he had accumulated over time. 2 months later, Dantalia finally finished a dungeon defense game, looking a decade older. His room was now moldy and gloomy, surrounded by trash bags and snack wrappers. Yet Dantalia was unaffected, eagerly choosing the next game to play. Suddenly, an electronic notification sounded and a message appeared on the screen. He was puzzled, as he normally didn't make friends with anyone. The screen changed again, revealing a thank you message from the creators of the dungeon defense game for completing it. Dantalia muttered a few meaningless phrases and then a survey message popped up. The question was peculiar, presenting 2 options: cute girls or mature women. Although confused, he randomly chose one to get it over with. The next question was even stranger, asking him to choose between finding excitement in being hit or in hitting others. He sighed, continuing to randomly answer to get through the survey. Suddenly, the screen vibrated, spamming similar alarming red questions, all binary choices about resolving issues with violence or intellect, keeping secrets or exploiting them, and definitions of friendship. He was so creeped out that he screamed for it to stop. A screen immediately changed to a yes/no question, asking if he knew how this world would end. Sweating and frowning, he stared at the screen for a long time. Finally, he clicked his tongue and chose yes, since he had already completed all the games. Immediately, another question appeared, asking if he could change that outcome. This time he hesitated, feeling a bit spooked. Without responding immediately, he shouted, suspecting it was a scam message designed to rob him. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got, cursing and feeling fortunate for not being deceived. A cockroach startled him, making him jump and accidentally press yes on the game controller. The light from the screen grew increasingly bright, enveloping the entire room where he was. Finally, the screen went dark and he disappeared, leaving behind a chaotic, empty room. He woke up in an unfamiliar landscape with unfamiliar hands and excruciating pain. Strangers dressed oddly threatened him to reveal information about a treasure and called him a demon lord. That marked the dreadful beginning of his new life. Dantalia woke up to find the hands that didn't seem to be his own in severe stomach pain. A group of thugs approached him, wielding clubs, demanding he disclose the location of the treasure while addressing him as Lord Demon. Utterly bewildered, Dantalia could not understand what they were talking about as he discovered he was kneeling in a large cave, flanked by 2 huge columns with crumbling but menacing stone statues. With the taste of blood in his mouth, he wondered what exactly was happening. He remembered playing a game at home and then nothing else. But now he had to put those thoughts aside to deal with the current situation, with pain coursing through his body and unable to escape with a broken leg. Despite the intense pain driving him nearly insane, he forced himself to stay alert to find a way out. The only thing he could think of was to start talking, try and gather some clues. Therefore, Dantalia, showing a terrified expression, asked why they were calling him the Demon Lord. The leader, Jack, grabbing his horns, lifted him up and asked if he had been beaten into stupidity, remarking sarcastically that the beautiful horns were crying. Significantly, he referred to him as Demon Lord Dantalia. Hearing this name made Dantalia's eyes widen, and old memories began to surface. This was the dungeon defense game, a fantasy game where heroes embark on adventures to defeat demon lords, a game where the world must be saved by battling numerous demon lords. The game was so difficult that death was normal, and the story was incredibly bleak, with the only outcome being the collapse of the world. He remembered playing the game where Dantalia was the weakest, the 71st trash-tier demon lord and the first to be defeated. He realized he had finished this game and those bizarre survey questions. At last, he understood that he was now in the world of the dungeon defense game and even became that weak Dantalia. Although unbelievable, this was the most logical explanation and also the worst-case scenario. Before Dantalia could speak, he was punched hard and thrown away by one of them. The blow was so painful that he choked, and it seemed they had no intention of stopping. Terrified, he realized that at this rate, he would surely die. They rushed at him, punching and kicking him back and forth as if he were merely a toy. Dantalia was unwilling to accept this. He had escaped his dreadful father and had been enjoying his luxuries, and now he was gasping for breath here. As his consciousness faded, he glimpsed a familiar figure sitting in a chair smiling at him. It felt eerily familiar. Indeed, he had experienced a similar situation before. In his past, Dantalia had been kidnapped by people holding grudges against his father, and by the fourth time, he had gotten used to it. Overwhelmed, he remained calm during the abductions. He had been tied to a chair with a gun pointed at his head, and that's when he wagered for his release from his father. He calmly told the kidnapper to shoot, surprising the man. If the gun was real, he would win, and if fake, he would lose. Holding the gun tightly to his head, he remained still until the kidnapper confessed in fear, and Dantalia lost the bet. From then on, he understood that the one with the stronger resolve would be the last to survive. Now the man gave him one last chance to spit out the treasure location. Having died once on that fateful day, he realized he could turn the situation around however he wanted. Jack was growing impatient, ordering Ralph with the giant spiked hammer to finish him off. Treasure could wait. Ralph, without hesitation, raised the massive hammer. A fierce gust of wind arose as Dantalia pushed himself up, raising his hands, shouting in a gesture of compromise. The hammer paused mid-air, and Jack, smirking maliciously, was also taken aback. Dantalia gritted his teeth and stood up, whispering to himself that he could do this. Despite the excruciating pain racking his body, his will was firmer than ever. No matter the cost, he was determined to survive. This resolve sparked a new energy in Dantalia. As he stood facing his opponents, his demeanor changed. The once defeated demon lord now exuded a confidence that seemed to alter the atmosphere around him. He knew he had to harness this moment, leveraging the fear and surprise he had instilled in his captors to turn the tables. Whether by wit, bluff, or sheer will, Dantalia was ready to fight for his survival in this bizarre and treacherous world he had unwittingly become a part of. After his father's death, he escaped the tormenting years. He should have been free, but it was only when a beam of light from the screen appeared and transported him into the game world, embodying the weakest demon lord, Dantalia, that his troubles began anew. As soon as he appeared, Dantalia faced the adventurers, and it seemed like death was imminent. It was ironic to Dantalia that his freedom was short-lived, but determined to survive at all costs, he quickly negotiated to disclose the treasure's location to the adventurers. Ralph laughed loudly upon realizing Dantalia's intention to give up, not only eager to find the treasure, but also desiring to decapitate Dantalia to earn accolades from his leader. Despite his bold words, Dantalia didn't even know if the treasure existed, and if he pointed in a random direction, they would surely kill him. Therefore, the most practical thing for Dantalia was to buy as much time as possible, so he knelt down admitting defeat. Clenching his fist, Dantalia revealed that the treasure was in the throne room of the demon lord, guarded by magic that only he could dispel. As soon as he finished speaking and was about to look up, a sharp golden light from Leaf's sword struck down. Leaf did not elaborate, merely warning that he would kill if Dantalia lied. Then the adventurers burst into laughter and rallied to retrieve the treasure from the demon lord's room. Dantalia watched them, relieved to have avoided one obstacle, knowing the real battle was just beginning. He was aware they wouldn't kill him yet, but that was only until they reached the demon lord's room. Frowning, Dantalia thought about his next plan, hurried by the adventurers and directly threatened by Leaf to move faster or be killed. Fearing for his life if he didn't act quickly, Dantalia wanted to kill them before they could kill him, but he faced difficulties due to their numbers and weapons. Remembering it was his castle, Dantalia quickly scanned the surroundings, hoping to use monsters or something else to fend off the adventurers. As Leaf kept urging Dantalia to move quickly, Dantalia was distracted, consumed with the realization that the monster corpses he had seen were long dead and of no value. He knew he had to act on his own without relying on anyone else. In a desperate search for a solution, Dantalia remembered a special skill from the game called the Eyes of Zeus. This high-level ability allowed a player to see their own position, enemies, items, and traps within the dungeon. Accessing the game's system interface, Dantalia found that he could use this skill right in his own castle. Through the system, Dantalia realized there were no soldiers guarding the castle, and the option to hire monsters through the contract of Hades appeared. However, he only had 100 libras, a meager sum that was only enough to hire 8 goblins, insufficient to face the fully equipped group of adventurers. He considered hiring a golem to increase his strength, but the success rate was only 60%, too risky. With no time left to ponder, Dantalia decided to use the Apostle of Aphrodite's skill to check the status of his enemies. The Apostle of Aphrodite's skill allowed Dantalia to see all information about the state of the adventurers, helping him discover their weaknesses. Leaf the adventurer urging him on and threatening, but Dantalia just smiled and apologized. With eyes full of determination, he was prepared to begin his counterattack. Dantalia had found a way to defeat them, and the first step to success was to gain their trust. He utilized the Apostle of Aphrodite, a high-level dungeon skill, to view Leaf's stats, the leader of the group. He seriously considered his next move while Leaf continued to threaten and urge him on. After seeing all of Leaf's stats, Dantalia realized an opportunity. He started to implement his plan despite knowing the risks. His determination radiated as he prepared to take down these pretentious adventurers. On the way to the throne room of the Demon Lord, Dantalia suddenly stopped and shouted, surprising the adventurers. An angry Leaf demanded to know what he was doing, and Dantalia seriously apologized and pointed ahead and warned of a trap. The adventurers immediately became cautious. Dantalia led the way, explaining that if they were not careful, the trap would activate and pose a danger to everyone. Leaf remained skeptical and loudly berated Dantalia, but Dantalia continued leading the way, volunteering to go ahead to disarm traps. Dantalia moved through a narrow, dark path, ignoring Leaf's demands to stop and continuing despite Leaf's accusations that he was spouting nonsense and was not allowed to flee. Dantalia countered that he couldn't run with his own legs. He mocked them, pointing out that they were unlike previous adventurers because they hadn't killed him immediately. He warned that if they did not keep close, they would not be safe, leaving them stunned by his statement. Reluctantly, Leaf encouraged his team to follow, but Jack also warned Leaf to be cautious. The others began to hesitate, recalling the trap they had encountered, which unnerved Leaf. However, Leaf still stubbornly shouted, questioning their manhood. Unbeknownst to them, this was exactly the outcome Dantalia wanted. As they ventured deeper into the cave, Dantalia held 3 arrows he had picked up from the corpses of dead monsters. Clenching them in his hand, he prepared mentally for the next step. Suddenly, Dantalia yelled out, lifting the arrows high and then striking them down hard, pretending to trigger a trap, his own scream echoing back to the adventurers. They panicked, questioning among themselves what had just happened. Leaf ordered the group to move forward, but as they proceeded, they discovered a trail of blood and found Dantalia lying motionless on the ground. An arrow had pierced his leg, and when Leaf inquired about the status of the trap, Dantalia responded that he had handled it, and now they could proceed safely. The adventurers felt relieved and even grateful for Dantalia's actions. He also used this situation to express his gratitude because they had spared his life. Dantalia painfully pulled the arrow from his leg, increasing the trust the adventurers felt towards him. The game system notified that Leaf's favorability towards him had increased by 5 points. Dantalia grinned cunningly, realizing his plan was on track. The favorability scores of the entire group increased, marking the initial success he had anticipated. Dantalia's plan did not stop here. He decided to continue to build the adventurers' trust, preparing for the next act in his scheme. The game system chimed in, announcing that Dantalia's charisma and other stats had increased. With calculated determination, Dantalia moved into the second phase of his counterattack, confident that he could turn the situation around. Despite his pain, Dantalia stood up and continued walking, while Leaf, outwardly perplexed, internally calculated how he might use Dantalia to his advantage. Leaf noted Dantalia's injury and instructed Jack to support him. Jack hoisted Dantalia onto his shoulder, prompting a quick thanks from Dantalia. However, Leaf loudly claimed the thanks were for saving them, rallying the group to boost their morale and move forward. Dantalia silently laughed, pleased with the progress, but he felt it would be challenging to convince the group's leader fully. He believed more was needed, and Phase 2 of his plan was about to commence. As the group stood before the grand doors of the Demon Lord's castle, Leaf marveled at its majesty before quickly opening the door. Upon entering, he immediately turned to demand that Dantalia show them the treasure's location. However, Dantalia suddenly began to cry, surprising everyone, especially Leaf. Jack, concerned, asked why he was crying, to which Dantalia softly apologized and explained that the tears were for his former comrades and family. Leaf, confused, questioned why a demon lord would have a family, and Dantalia affirmed that he did. Dantalia began recounting his past when his castle was a place of honor. Everything changed when the human army attacked, and Dantalia was discovered and forced to flee, with the human soldiers in pursuit. When he was shot by archers, a large guardian demon stood in front of him, taking the arrows to protect him. The demon asked if he was all right and urged Dantalia to run. Dantalia refused to leave his protector behind, but the demon insisted despite being riddled with arrows. With no other choice, Dantalia tearfully looked back at the demon for the last time and fled. As Dantalia narrated his story, tears streamed down his face, and he stated that those who had died had done so protecting him. The group stood silently, unsure of what to say, only managing to express their condolences. Jack was surprised, as Dantalia did not match the cruel image of a demon lord he had envisioned. The game system notified that the favorability ratings of Jack and the others towards Dantalia had increased. Leaf, puzzled by his feelings, recalled a girl once telling him that a demon lord was a despicable creature. never capable of tears. Although Leaf's favorability score also increased, he didn't care as he only needed Dantalia to be useful. Dantalia then called them over and thanked them for bringing him back to his castle. He mentioned that they treated him differently from those who had killed his family. Placing his hand over his heart, Dantalia earnestly stated that those who had died would have forgiven them. He declared that both the treasure of the Demon Lord's castle and his own life were at their disposal. Dantalia then announced that they had arrived at their destination. Leaf smiled contentedly. Everyone stood before the Demon Lord's room. As promised, Dantalia was to give Leaf's group the Demon Lord's treasure. So when Leaf inquired about the treasure, Dantalia reiterated that it was sealed by magic, and he would now break the seal. He asked Leaf's group to step back for safety, and they complied. Once they were at a safe distance, Dantalia was inwardly pleased that everything was proceeding according to plan. With a sly smile, he opened the system interface and discovered that there was no treasure in the castle as they had expected, just 100 libra he had left before his reincarnation. He decided to withdraw 76 libra to deceive Leaf's group. After completing the transaction, he declared himself as the 71st ranked Demon Lord and would bestow the treasure upon the group of heroes. Coins began to fall from above, stunning Leaf's group before they joyously started to gather them. Leaf urged his subordinates to pick up the coins quickly so he could distribute them evenly, while still excited about exploiting Dantalia further. While the system was announcing an increase in favorability, Dantalia suddenly reported that about 30 new adventurers had just entered the dungeon due to the magic he had used, causing Leaf's group to panic as they could not handle such a large number. Leaf asked Dantalia about an escape route, and he replied that there was only one way in and out. The adventurers worried that if the 30 adventurers attacked, they would be wiped out in a minute. Dantalia told Leaf that they couldn't avoid them, and if necessary, it would have to confront them head-on. Dantalia then asked Leaf if he had a map, explaining that although he didn't have enough energy to track the intruder's direction, he could serve as bait. Because the invading group could use magic, they would sense Dantalia's magic and approach. Based on the map, Dantalia pointed out that there were 3 directions they could take and suggested that the group split up, each person taking a different route to exit. Leaf felt confused and suspected that Dantalia might be planning to sacrifice himself again, so he quickly questioned whether Dantalia intended to flee. Dantalia hastily explained that he only wanted to help and had no other intentions. Dantalia then moved closer to Leaf and whispered something into his ear. After hearing Dantalia's words, Leaf smiled and agreed with the strategy, but he requested that Dantalia not reveal the plan to the other members of the group. Following this, Leaf gathered his teammates and prepared to take action. Dantalia silently thanked Leaf in his heart and continued to prepare for his plan, reminding himself that Leaf might not fully trust him. But Dantalia was committed to seeing this plan through to the end. In the dungeon, the fire blazed brightly. Dantalia had just been led out of the castle and overheard them discussing Leaf's bold plan. Previously, Leaf had gathered them, with 3 bags of money already prepared. He outlined a plan that involved splitting into 2 groups based on a map, explaining that there were 3 exits and the invaders would choose one. With 30 people, he asserted that their group couldn't win in a direct confrontation, but if they split up, at least one group might survive. Leaf, holding a money bag, said he would keep it temporarily despite objections. He convinced them that those who went with Dantalia could earn a substantial reward and become heroes. When someone expressed doubt, Leaf reiterated the importance of courage, family, and survival, compelling everyone to comply. A group of 5 was sent in another direction. Leaf secretly laughed, having deceived everyone, though he had worried the plan might fail. Dantalia remembered persuading Leaf to fabricate a reason to keep all the treasure, arguing it would give him the greatest advantage. He also suggested Leaf have a few people watch him, proving that if he lied, he couldn't escape. Leaf was stunned, then laughed, agreeing because he realized he would benefit the most in the end. Now, Dantalia knew what Leaf was thinking. He looked at the map, ready to act immediately. In a pact with Hayes, Dantalia also vowed to destroy them all. The dungeon shook violently, causing the adventurers to panic. Jack, who was supporting Dantalia, also feared when he saw the ground glow and power surge. A torch fell, and in confusion, Jack asked Dantalia what was happening. Dantalia covered his mouth, warning him to be silent to avoid pain. Holding a sword, Dantalia thanked Jack, and while Jack cried in fear, Dantalia coldly stabbed him to death. The others were still absorbed in the scene of purple light flaring up, a magical circle appearing and a giant stone monster emerging amidst deafening roars. They'd fled in terror as the monster began to attack, with rocks falling heavily. One man opened his eyes amid the dust and saw his teammate crushed under a boulder. Another was caught and crushed by the monster, and his sword broke instantly when he tried to fight back. The monster rampaged, petrifying a nearby onlooker who was horrified at the sight of his teammate's blood smeared everywhere. A man inadvertently bumped into Dantalia from behind, urgently pleading with him to run away. However, before he could act, Dantalia's sword pierced through his chest. Dantalia bent down, smiling coldly, stating that it was all too obvious. His eyes glinted with malevolence. After all, he was the Demon King. Treasure-hunting adventurers from outside, believing his words, cautiously entered only to find Dantalia standing before them. Seeing him, Leaf became angry. Cheerfully, they inquired about the whereabouts of the others. Dantalia coldly informed them that they were all dead. Angered, one threatened him, pointing out that he was alone. Dantalia, stroking his blood-stained sword, laughed mockingly, asserting that he had killed them all, which only heightened their fear. Observing their terrified expressions, Dantalia mocked their stupidity and reminded them that he was the one who had allowed the others to be reborn. Upon hearing this, Leaf swore angrily. Dantalia looked at him with an even more triumphant smile. He continued to provoke them further. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, they charged at him. At that moment, the golem monster stepped in front of Dantalia, and with one blow it sent them to be reborn. Despite witnessing the fate of the others, they continued to attack the monster. The very next second, Ralph rushed forward with a hammer and shattered the golem into pieces, turning joyfully to say something. But before he could act, Dantalia swiftly dispatched him as well. Leaf, seeing his comrade fall after a single strike, was both frightened and surprised. As the golem regenerated, Leaf was even more astonished. Dantalia then explained that it could only be destroyed by smashing its core. He looked at them with disdain and mockery. Dantalia eyed him murderously, and seeing this spectacle, Leaf was terrified. But ultimately, Leaf stubbornly believed he could still escape. At that moment, he suddenly dropped his sword and surrendered. While Leaf was confident of his victory, Dantalia noticed Leaf's status panel. Expecting Dantalia to come closer to use his skill, Leaf waited. However, as Dantalia approached, he stopped. Dantalia then told Leaf that he already knew everything. He laughed loudly, his eyes filled with murderous intent, calling out Leaf's name. Stubborn to the end, Leaf charged at Dantalia. But before he could do anything, Leaf collapsed to the ground, ensnared by a liquid that tightly bound his legs. He looked down at the slime monster at his feet and cursed in anger. The golem monster approached, grabbed Leaf by the wrist, and instantly snapped his arm, causing Leaf's face to turn pale and his eyes to bulge in shock. Leaf, reflecting on his mistakes and doubting where he went wrong, realized perhaps he had been wrong from the start and should never have opposed Dantalia. Meanwhile, Dantalia was transported to another dimension where he encountered his father. Unable to hear his father's words initially, just before the vision ended, he heard that he would be crippled without his father's presence. Angry, Dantalia dismissed his father's image. Suddenly, someone called Dantalia's name, startling him awake from the vision. He then struggled to sit up. Lapis brought out a contract and discussed a loan. Despite feeling extremely angry, Dantalia contained his emotions. He then recalled everything that had happened since he arrived in this world. After defeating everyone, he collapsed to the ground, exhausted. Suddenly, the system announced something, revealing skills that surprised him because they were only level 1. He then realized that from now on, he would become the Demon King Dantalia. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became, but he eventually had to accept the reality that he couldn't return to the real world. With this in mind, Dantalia went back to choosing his skills. After some deliberation, he decided to choose the skills of an apostle of Aphrodite. He looked around, exhausted. Dantalia, tired, touched the golem and asked it to lend him its body. After speaking, he simply fell into a deep sleep, worn out. Returning to the present, he was still lying in bed, and his last memories stopped there. Upon waking, he found himself in bed. Dantalia looked around the dilapidated room, instantly realizing that this was Dantalia's room, likely brought here by the golem monster. In this moment, Dantalia desperately wanted to believe he was dreaming, but reality harshly woke him up as he was now in the body of the Demon King Dantalia. Unlike Dantalia's previous experiences, new calamities were just beginning. Suddenly, Lapis entered and Dantalia looked her over. After a long while in the living room, Dantalia brazenly claimed that the one who borrowed money from her wasn't him. Lapis refused to understand these words since it was clear that he was the one who had borrowed money from them 2 months ago. Lapis then brought out the contract, causing Dantalia a great headache. Looking at the debt in front of him, he couldn't understand why he had to deal with this issue. Dantalia found it baffling that they would lend money to a fool. At this point, he seemed to have an idea, and then asked Lapis what would happen if he didn't pay the full amount. Lapis immediately replied that he would first have to declare bankruptcy. Dantalia continued, asking what would happen if he did not declare bankruptcy. Lapis coldly stated that his castle would then be mortgaged and he would be required to do certain things. Suddenly, Dantalia asked what today's date was. Lapis found this question strange, feeling somewhat overwhelmed by his immense power, but still hesitantly answered that it was April 17, 1505. Dantalia thought about the increasing debt and the possibility of bankruptcy, which made him feel extremely headache-ridden. Yet, to everyone's surprise, Dantalia continued to borrow another 10,000 libra from her. Above the headquarters of the Kinkuska Company, birds flew leisurely in the sky, contrasting with Torkel's urgency. As he rushed to the meeting room, jotting down documents and asking a spirit to deliver them to Prince Payman. After inquiring about the affairs of the Batavia port, Torkel checked his watch, realized it was late, and hurried into the meeting room where everyone was already assembled except for him. Lodbrok chided Torkel for his tardiness and then declared the meeting open. Lodbrok introduced Kankuska as the home of the two demon lords, Malbus and Payman, along with their servants, and also as the largest company in the demon world. He then asked Lapis to explain the reason for the meeting, which made the members angry and curse at her terribly, simply because she was of mixed blood. Lapis silently endured until Lodbrok asked everyone to maintain order and instructed her to continue. Lapis then announced that Demon King Dantelia was requesting money, which initially angered Torkel and the others, as they were convened over what they considered a trivial matter. However, when Lodbrok spoke up, Lapis continued, revealing that Dantelia wanted to borrow an additional 10,000 libra. This information irritated Torkel further, prompting Lapis to recount her negotiation with Dantelia, during which he proposed borrowing the large sum despite still owing 196 libra. Lapis subtly hinted that Dantelia was cornered, that he did not back down and instead approached her, threatening that she could go bankrupt and become a minion for the company. Despite the intimidation, Lapis calmly asserted her autonomy in decision-making. Dantelia scoffed, continuing his persuasive tactics, but Lapis remained silent. Frustrated, Dantelia lifted her chin and asked directly. Lapis angrily brushed his hand away and ultimately agreed to the loan. When Lapis finished her account, Torkel slammed his fist on the table in strong objection, while Lodbrok also disagreed and asked her to continue. Lapis disclosed that Dantelia claimed a plague was imminent and only he could develop an antidote, even implying that Lapis was his lover. This revelation shocked the members. Lapis further explained that her approach to Dantelia was aimed at making him a servant of the company, which angered the members even more and led them to harshly berate her. At this point, Lodbrok burst into laughter, praising Lapis for turning Demon King Dantelia into a tool for the company. After consulting the members, he ordered Lapis to return to Dantelia's castle and agree to lend him the 10,000 libra. In the merchant city of Curious, Lapis requested a trader to search for each herb identical to the sample she provided, while also hiring thousands of workers for this task with a substantial sum of money. The trader, stunned, asked for clarification, but Lapis coldly stated that it was a direct order from Dantelia, urging him to proceed as quickly as possible. After she left, she drew the attention of the bystanders, who speculated that she was Dantelia's lover and mockingly referred to her as a half-breed. Returning to the Demon King's castle, Lapis reported that she had completed the task and then inquired about the epidemic. Dantelia simply smiled dismissively to avoid discussing his true intentions. He also teased Lapis about nearly spending all the borrowed money on herbs, then offered her a drink. Initially, Lapis refused, but under Dantelia's stern gaze, she reluctantly agreed. After drinking, Lapis realized there was something unusual about the wine and was surprised when Dantelia revealed it was made from the collected herbs. She asked if this was a joke, but Dantelia assured her of his seriousness and mentioned the reason why Lapis had persuaded the company to lend him money. Dantelia continued to inquire about the date, and after Lapis responded that it was June 20, he quickly noted it down and gave her an address, instructing her to go there. Lapis was curious about the purpose of this mission, but Dantelia only smiled cryptically, saying she would understand once she arrived. On June 24, Lapis went to the Syracuse hero's bathhouse. While soaking in a secluded corner, she examined Dantelia's paper, pondering his intentions. Suddenly, a scream rang out. Lapis rushed to check and found a girl who had fainted with a spreading black bruise on her body. Later, at the local hospital, many patients with similar conditions continuously appeared, causing great concern for Lapis. A doctor, noticing she was not infected, advised her to leave town. While listening to him, Lapis was shocked to see a black bruise on his neck as well. She remembered the wine Dantelia had forced her to drink and realized it was related. He seemed to have anticipated the epidemic, and she, having drunk the wine, was the only one immune. Dantelia's precise calculation left Lapis astounded. Meanwhile, Dantelia stood casually by the window, holding a glass of wine, observing everything unfold according to his plan. On July 16, 1505, according to the royal calendar in Kankuska, a female spirit urgently bearing a message from the command center flew towards Torkel's reception room. Upon arrival, she immediately knocked on the door to inform him of an urgent matter. Torkel, annoyed by the interruption, scolded his assistant and then quickly apologized to Payman. She calmly told Torkel not to mind her and to just go about his business. Hearing this, Torkel apologized to her once more before inviting her in. As soon as he opened the report to check it, Torkel's face turned grim, revealing his shock. The intelligence report indicated that an epidemic was breaking out and spreading rapidly across the kingdom of Sardinia, with a frighteningly high mortality rate. Seeing Torkel's terrified expression, Payman asked him what was wrong, but Torkel could only stutter a few shaky words. He continued reading the report, which revealed that only the demon King Dantalia could manufacture the cure for this disease, and that Lapis had been the one to collect the herbs necessary for concocting this remedy, estimated to cost between 2 and 3 million gold coins. Curious, Payman reached out and asked Torkel to show her the paper, which he promptly did. After a while, without any reaction from Payman, Torkel anxiously called out her name, and then Payman spoke up, remarking that the situation was quite interesting. Back with Dantalia, he was standing alone next to a window, telling Lapis she could rest here for a bit as she had returned earlier than he expected. Despite Dantalia's ongoing chatter, Lapis remained silent, staring intently at him. Eventually, she asked Dantalia if he had known about the epidemic beforehand. He simply smiled and said she could think whatever she wanted. Unsatisfied with Dantalia's response, Lapis questioned him about the outbreak in Syracuse and his sending her to collect the herbs for the antidote. The sound of heavy rain drowned out Dantalia's light laughter. He flashed a cunning smile and told Lapis that he had mentioned it from the beginning. She glared at him while Dantalia reminisced about the plot of a dungeon defense game from 1505 when a dangerous epidemic erupted in Syracuse and the only ingredient for the antidote was the black herb. Reflecting on the situation, Dantalia smirked because he had entered the game at the exact moment the epidemic broke out, allowing him to leverage the knowledge he had from before. Not only that, but he also silently thanked Lapis for helping him secure a loan with the organization. Then Dantalia asked Lapis what her organization was thinking, but regardless of his questioning, Lapis remained silent, not responding. Seeing this, Dantalia could only walk over to Lapis and explain that the reason she was here was that returning to the organization would be life-threatening. He added that some people in the company would think an epidemic outbreak was impossible, and that the only reason for the outbreak was because of Lapis, which darkened her expression. Concluding his point, Dantalia reminded her of the tasks he had assigned her, implicating her as the mastermind behind this incident. These revelations left Lapis speechless, as she remembered her mixed heritage and wondered if the demon king standing before her was the person she once knew. Finally, Dantalia offered Lapis the choice to become his subordinate, along with the benefits she would receive. Surprised by Dantalia's words, Lapis felt her heart race uncertainly. Then she knelt down, deciding to become Dantalia's subordinate and swore her allegiance to him. Dantalia, pleased with her decision, promised to show Lapis the most wonderful thing she had ever seen. A week after this event, as Lapis pushed a cart of hot food to Dantalia's office, she reflected on becoming his subordinate. Upon arriving, she knocked on the door to announce the food had arrived. After receiving no response, Lapis pushed the door open and entered. Inside, the office was in disarray, with items strewn about as if it were a garbage dump, and Dantalia was leisurely sleeping in a chair. Seeing Dantalia not reading books but sleeping all week, Lapis wondered what he was thinking. She recalled 6 months ago when she first approached Dantalia with her own agenda, kneeling and introducing herself, but before she could finish speaking, Dantalia told her to shut up. He disdainfully scolded Lapis and asked her what her purpose was for coming. In Lapis's thoughts, Dantalia was even more of a scoundrel than she had imagined, so when she showed Dantalia the money, he immediately pounced like a moth to a flame. Reflecting on her earlier intentions to spread rumors that Dantalia's castle contained treasures as a means of bringing him suffering, Lapis now realized how different he was from what she had originally imagined. Not only that, but he also held the lives of over half the continent in his grasp. After pondering this, Lapis inadvertently asked how he could sleep so comfortably given the circumstances. She then thought about the fact that several nations wanted to purchase the epidemic treatment, yet the company maintained silence, which baffled her. Meanwhile, Torkel stood in front of Lodbrok's room, asking if he was inside. After a moment, Lodbrok allowed Torkel to enter. As Torkel stepped in, the pitch-black room suddenly lit up. Lodbrok, sitting sternly at the center of the table, inquired about Torkel's visit. Torkel hesitantly spoke about the severe situation of the epidemic. Lodbrok showed no surprise and stated that about 30% of the population would soon perish. Torkel, extremely alarmed, sought confirmation that Lodbrok was not joking. Lodbrok merely glared at him and asked if he had ever been known to joke. He then revealed that as of that day, all the Demon Kings had ceased their cooperation with the company. Hearing this, Torkel was visibly stunned and angrily blamed Lapis, inquiring about her current situation. Lodbrok asserted that Lapis had betrayed the company because wherever she appeared, an epidemic ensued. Using the clues gathered, Lodbrok speculated that the outbreak was not a coincidence but was orchestrated. After his conjecture, both men fell into deep thought, pondering who might be deliberately sabotaging the company. Initially, Lodbrok suspected Lapis, but upon further reflection, he realized she lacked the capability to do this. After further discussion, Lodbrok concluded that Barbatos was behind it, as she was the only one who could manipulate dark magic and control the epidemic. Despite Lodbrok's firm statement, Torkel remained hesitant to fully accept that Barbatos was the mastermind. He feared the continuation of the epidemic might lead to human extinction. Suddenly, Torkel stood up abruptly, asking what Lodbrok would do if Barbatos was indeed the mastermind, and shared his concern that the company had always maintained good relations with the Demon Kings for the benefits they brought. Therefore, if Lodbrok intended to oppose a Demon King, he would need solid evidence. Lodbrok reassured Torkel not to worry, as he planned to make both Lepus and Dantalia confess everything. From within the shadows, Lodbrok's living doll emerged, holding a scroll in her hand. Lodbrok reached out to take the scroll and then laughed ominously. As he unfurled the scroll, a flame suddenly flared up, illuminating the contents. Laughing loudly, Lodbrok instructed Torkel to go to Payment and share the information they knew. Torkel nodded in agreement, hastening to comply, as Payment and Barbatos had always been at odds, ensuring her likely cooperation. As Torkel turned to leave, Lodbrok suddenly bit into the neck of the living doll, draining her blood while declaring his intention to turn Lapis into a part of his collection of living dolls. Meanwhile, Lapis was trying to wake Dantalia. After a moment, he woke up, asking Lapis what was happening. She responded that she had received a summons, which puzzled Dantalia. Quickly, Lapis explained that it was for a meeting. On the other side, Lodbrok, reveling in the situation, declared that the rulers of the world were gathering. Lapis added that the Night of the Witches was about to take place. The Berbear sisters were singing and flying toward the castle of the Demon King Dantalia, buzzing with discussions about their new client, Dantalia, and his lady. One of them praised the couple's romance as truly enchanting and guessed that Dantalia must be a gentleman, only to be countered by another who cautioned against holding him in too high regard. Meanwhile, Lapis was urging Dantalia to hurry up, though he was visibly annoyed. Due to the need to go out, Dantalia reluctantly changed into a more presentable outfit, wondering why he had to go there. Not having been exposed to sunlight for a long time, Dantalia was unaccustomed and shielded his eyes with his hand, asking Lapis what the witching night was. Lapis, frustrated, lamented how a demon king like him could be unaware of such an event. When asked by Lapis if he had never attended a witching night before, Dantalia nonchalantly confirmed it. Lapis then explained that the witching night was an event where demon kings gathered to address issues beyond their borders and maintain world order, held irregularly and requiring the presence of all demon kings. Dantalia found the whole affair extremely troublesome and asked Lapis to provide a reason why he should not go. Exasperated by his attitude, Lapis announced that the main topic of the meeting would be an epidemic, as well as the venue for the meeting. Coincidentally, the venue was near the Konkuska Company, and Lapis reminded Dantalia that as the host of the meeting and the only one who could develop a cure, his absence would serve their purpose. Dantalia frowned and complained about how things never seemed to end, then considered that it might not be wise to oppose them. Eventually, Dantalia reluctantly agreed, though he thought it might be an opportunity to gather useful information in case things went south with Lapis by his side. Dantalia's peculiar demeanor caught Lapis' attention, but she merely glanced at him and said nothing more. He laughed, thinking of the reasons he had spent a great deal of money to persuade Lapis to be his subordinate. Dantalia then moved on, asking Lapis how to get to the place, adding that if his absence would benefit their company, they would surely find ways to prevent him from going. Lapis, well prepared, simply mentioned she had arranged an important appointment and checked the time on her watch. As the time approached, Lapis informed Dantalia that they were almost at their destination. The singing of the Berbear sisters suddenly filled the air near where Dantalia and Lapis stood, surprising him. Shortly after, the Berbear sisters landed successfully, expressing their gratitude for using their services and announcing they had come to escort the Demon King and his lady on their journey. Upon concluding their introduction, they all knelt down. Confused by the events, Dantalia turned to ask Lapis if everything was all right. She calmly advised him not to judge them by their appearances and explained that their youthful looks and talents were due to their age. They were all about 200 years old. After understanding the situation, Dantalia cleared his throat and politely asked the Berbear sisters to stand up, then thanked them for their help. The sisters were visibly astonished by his demeanor and hesitantly obeyed. One of the Berbear sisters suddenly summoned a strange broom and invited Dantalia to sit on it. Unfamiliar with this mode of transport, he awkwardly inquired if it was safe, to which the sisters assured him not to worry. They then all set off for Niflheim. In Niflheim at Hermes Square, Dantalia complained about the discomfort of sitting too long on the broom, causing him pain, while Lapis just hoped he would be all right after the long flight. Dantalia then invited them to stay for dinner with him and his companion and the Berbear sisters. Not wanting to be impolite, accepted and mentioned it would take them to a place. However, Lapis reminded him, yet he insisted that he needed to rest. Lapis' expression darkened, and she remained silent. Dantalia, noticing her concern, asked if she was worried the company might do something to them, then confidently said that no one would dare attack a demon king in such a city, prompting Lapis to nod in agreement. Soon after, the Berbear sisters led Dantalia and Lapis to a bustling festival. While walking, Dantalia suddenly heard someone screaming and turned to see that it was Andromalius, who was beating and berating an elderly employee despite his apologies. Curious, Dantalia asked Lapis about the identity of that despicable person. Lapis introduced him and his background. Hearing her explanation, Dantalia started to contemplate his own standing. Realizing his own rank was higher, Dantalia made a show of it by grabbing a nearby glass of wine and taking a sip, which made Lapis glare at him. Then Dantalia, with a loud laugh, set the glass down, remarking that this trip was turning out to be more interesting than he thought. A message appeared announcing the game Dungeon Defense. This was a place ruled by 72 demon kings of the world, a fantasy game aimed at defeating all the demon kings. A fierce fire appeared, which was the destruction of the main character's village when he was a child by a demon king. Following this, an image of that child as a grown-up appeared, now a powerful figure capable of defeating demon kings, telling the story of his adventures around the world with his companions. The game began in the year 1515 by the imperial calendar. While it was currently 1505, 10 years before the game started. A character appeared, who was Dantalia, the 71st demon king, the one who had destroyed the main character's village, and had inadvertently created the moment for the hero to arise. Another fearsome demon king laughed menacingly. This was Andromalius, the 72nd demon king. The crowd was nervous due to the commotion. Some were shouting, others endlessly apologizing. Some bystanders were so angry they clenched their fists. Andromalius continued to kick the person on the ground while shouting at him. Dantalia, on the other hand, smiled strangely to himself, thinking it would only be a matter of time before someone came to this village. Meanwhile, Andromalius continued to shout, calling the man on the ground a wretch. Dantalia watched everything with his hand supporting his face, internally noting that things were unfolding faster than he had anticipated. Suddenly, Dantalia stood up, holding his wine glass as if he had come to an understanding. He took a sip and guessed what the man might do next. Raising his wine glass high, Lapis stood beside him, puzzled by his actions. Then Dantalia dropped his wine glass to the ground, declaring that the trip was more fun than he thought. The glass shattered on impact. Andromalius, confused, turned around. Dantalia looked at him with a peculiar smile, which irritated Andromalius. Turning back angrily, Andromalius cursed at the wretch and asked Dantalia what he was looking at. Dantalia simply smiled without responding, which only infuriated Andromalius further. He quickly moved towards Dantalia, cursing. Unperturbed, Dantalia called for Lapis. He looked at Andromalius and asked if he had any guards or a security force. Lapis shook her head, explaining that Andromalius spent most of his time at the casinos of Niflheim. She seriously added that he was notorious for abusing his status as a demon king to oppress the people, making him the most disgraceful among the demon kings. Hearing this, Dantalia chuckled softly. Andromalius, caught off guard by Dantalia's smile, stared at them and questioned their attire. However, his attention quickly shifted to the horns, realizing that Lapis was a hybrid of a human and a succubus, and they were the ones being discussed. Lapis continuously reminded Dantalia not to do anything too dangerous, as conflicts between demon kings could lead to significant troubles. He laughed and asked if that was the law. Lapis affirmed it was, explaining that demon kings stood above even the nobility, as a high and powerful race capable of annihilating a nation, and there were a total of 72 demon kings. She pictured the assembly of demon kings in her mind, explaining that they used a common set of laws to maintain order due to the numerous issues involved. Lapis seriously reminded him of the law prohibiting demon kings from fighting each other, advising Dantalia to stay calm before engaging with another demon king, or he would face severe penalties. With a secretive smile, Dantalia mulled over something and then stepped forward to confront Andromalius. Andromalius, with a menacing face, demanded to know who Dantalia was. Dantalia, with a booming laugh, replied that who he was didn't matter. He told Andromalius that his bullying was intolerable and ordered him to get out of his sight. Andromalius, enraged by these words, lost his temper and charged at him. Lapis, standing behind, moved to intervene, but Dantalia stopped her with his hand, surprising her. He looked at the person charging towards him, feeling prepared and almost eager for the confrontation. However, suddenly, Andromalius' fist stopped mid-air. Dantalia coldly observed the halted fist. Laughing loudly, Andromalius then claimed he had heard many strange rumors, including one about a demon king having a common lover, implying it was a hybrid. Dantalia gave him a warning look, while Lapis felt uncomfortable hearing these mocking words as Andromalius loudly taunted them. Andromalius then placed a hand on Dantalia's shoulder, expressing his surprise at encountering him here, and sneered while calling his name. Internally, Dantalia scoffed at Andromalius' ignorance, outwardly asking, "So what if you did?" Andromalius laughed boisterously, claiming he had almost broken the law. His laughter filled the air, and with a taunt, he called Dantalia a wretch, saying that had he not recognized him, he would have committed an offense. Pointing at Dantalia, Andromalius accused him of deliberately provoking him to attack. He then mockingly asked Dantalia if he really thought he would strike, calling him a mere clown. Dantalia's face darkened in response. Andromalius then moved past Dantalia towards Lapis, questioning if she was the one. He derisively accused Lapis of seducing the Demon King and called her vermin, claiming he could tell just by looking into her eyes. Lapis remained silent, enduring his insults. Andromalius belittled her, saying she was lowly and dared to equate herself with royalty. He inappropriately touched her chest, questioning how Dantalia could be attracted to her. Moving his finger down to her abdomen, he mentioned he also wanted to taste what Dantalia found appealing. Lapis, finding his actions intolerable, told him to stop. Andromalius only looked at her with contempt. Andromalius turned back to Dantalia, continuing to discuss the law, smiling vilely as he reminded them that the law only applied to demon kings. Suddenly, he threw a punch towards Lapis, startling her. His blow landed forcefully on her face, distorting it. The crowd around them reacted with shock to his actions. Andromalius gleefully proclaimed that he could hit anyone who was not a demon king, and therefore his attack on Lapis was permissible. He announced that he would beat Lapis to a pulp and then return her, or if he preferred, he might keep her for a while. Throughout this ordeal, Dantalia stood coldly by, watching Andromalius wreak havoc, calculating his response. Andromalius, with a twisted smile, screamed out his intention to attack Lapis. Dantalia silently watched his frenzied actions. In front of everyone, Andromalius unabashedly displayed his cruel nature. At that moment, Lapis had already been beaten and was lying on the ground. Proud of his achievement, Andromalius warned those present, threateningly demanding that everyone bow down to him. He stated that he was ready to use violence against anyone who dared to disobey. Hearing this, everyone present remained silent, which made Andromalius even more smug. His gaze once again fell on Lapis, who lay motionless on the ground. With a savage smile, he lifted his foot and forcefully stomped on Lapis, causing her intense pain and making her scream. This seemed to please Andromalius even more. Throughout this, he continued to observe Andromalius' excessive behavior. Turning to Dantalia, Andromalius uttered challenging words, implying that despite his lover being beaten, he could only stand and watch. His eyes grew more fierce, believing himself to be the ruler of this place. Suddenly, Andromalius paused and his expression changed. Turning back, he saw Dantalia chuckling. He squinted, hinting that Andromalius' grandiose words weren't really followed by many. Andromalius replied that if they dared to defy him, he would resort to violence. At this, Dantalia smirked sarcastically, questioning whether Andromalius had truly subdued anyone with his strength. This left Andromalius surprised. Suddenly, a noise momentarily distracted him from Dantalia. Lapis had managed to stand up after the kick from Andromalius. His face darkened and his mouth worked furiously with angry words. Lapis, now staring intensely at him, seemed to infuriate Andromalius further. He charged at her and threw a punch straight at her face, thinking she was challenging him. Unbeknownst to Andromalius, he would soon regret this action. Unlike before, she did not fall but stood firm, which surprised Andromalius. Throughout, Lapis maintained the same intense gaze. The next punch came at Lapis, looking incredibly fierce. The surrounding onlookers could only stand there, mouths agape. From a distance, Dantalia observed with a knowing smile. As Lapis continued to fight defiantly, Andromalius grew increasingly furious. However, Dantalia spoke up, forcing him to halt. It turned out that Lapis was a half-demon who had grown up in the slums, accustomed to being beaten, making any further assault as ineffective as water off a duck's back. Yet Andromalius persisted in his attack. At that moment, Dantalia took hold of a knife. Lapis remained standing, which enraged Andromalius further. He began to doubt himself, questioning how he, as a demon king, could not defeat Lapis. He then hurled a stream of curses at Lapis, his eyes blazing red as he declared he would kill her. However, a distraction caused him to lose focus. Immediately afterward, a blow struck Andromalius' face. He stood wide-eyed in astonishment, as surprised as everyone else, including Lapis. He fell, clutching his face and howling in pain from the strike to his eye. Dantalia did not hesitate to mock him, saying he might as well be blind for all the good his eyes did him, not even knowing whom he was talking to. Hearing this, Lapis reminded him of something. Subsequently, Dantalia boldly drew Lapis close to him and embraced her, leaving her astonished. Despite her surprise, Lapis quite enjoyed this affectionate moment. Dantalia, holding Lapis close, his gaze filled with murderous intent towards Andromalius, continued to express his gratitude. Calling her name gently, Dantalia took Lapis's hand and raised it, hinting at a surprise. Lapis looked on curiously as Dantalia spoke. Suddenly, something sparkled on her ring finger, surprising her immensely. Dantalia held her hand up, urging Lapis to stay silent and wait. In front of the gathered crowd, Dantalia revealed their identities and affirmed that despite their love being forbidden, he would continue to love her. Turning back to Andromalius, who was still clutching his eye, Dantalia declared it was time for judgment, stating that Andromalius' crimes would not be forgiven. The ring on Lepus' hand sparkled brightly as Dantalia declared himself the 71st Demon King and proclaimed his love for her in front of an astonished crowd. Then, looking towards Andromalius, Dantalia declared that he would not forgive him for harming Lepus, even if Andromalius were a Demon King himself. This statement shocked the onlookers even more, as Dantalia was ready to defy everything for the one he loved. Then, with a sly smile, Dantalia reminded her to step back and prepare to watch the drama about to unfold. Before the crowd, Dantalia spoke words that stoked the people's frustration with Andromalius, urging them to rise and join him in passing judgment. Andromalius, sitting on the ground, immediately yelled at Dantalia to shut up, arguing that Dantalia, being only slightly above him, had no right to judge him, and that by striking him, Dantalia himself had broken the law and should be the one judged. Andromalius then shouted for the bystanders to seize Dantalia, threatening violence if they did not comply. However, Dantalia simply walked up to Andromalius and reminded him that he had been too presumptuous. Then, to the crowd's further amazement, Dantalia handed the power of judgment over to them. He highlighted that the survival of a demon king depended on these people, whom Andromalius had disregarded, indulging only in debauchery, oppressing the weak, and uttering words that stirred the public's hatred towards him. Andromalius became extremely panicked as he watched the crowd slowly siding with Dantalia, using vile language to insist that they continue to follow his commands. Seeing his reaction, Dantalia mockingly asked why Andromalius seemed so fearful, or if he was afraid he wouldn't be able to see his path anymore. Dantalia's taunting only embarrassed Andromalius further, causing him to demand that Dantalia shut up. Yet, Dantalia grinned, remarking that if someone were to kill him now, he probably wouldn't even know who it was. As Andromalius was still clamoring for Dantalia to be silent, he was suddenly stabbed with a sword, shocking him as he turned to see that a commoner had done it. Before Andromalius could react, Dantalia placed a hand on his shoulder, noting that everything was going according to his plan, largely thanks to Andromalius himself. Andromalius, hearing Dantalia say this, was unable to comprehend and asked him to repeat, but the cries from the crowd calling for Andromalius's death frightened him into using a meek tone to negotiate for mercy. Truly, what goes around comes around, and seeing Andromalius's pitiful state now, Dantalia could only laugh. With everything settled, Dantalia turned and walked away, leaving Andromalius behind to face the wrath of the people. Feeling somewhat tired and wanting to postpone the evening's activities, Dantalia was reassured by the witches who offered to take him home. However, he sensed something was missing. It turned out Beatrice, who often wandered off, was absent. He brushed it off as not a big deal, but had some questions for the witches. High above, a female voice laughed heartily, admiring the impressive drama and promising an even grander spectacle next time. As night fell, the city grew quiet. In a grand mansion along a corridor, the dwarf Torkel was visibly worried as he had not been able to contact Ivar for a week. Approaching a large door, he peeked inside calling for Ivar, but was greeted by several coffins. Clearly, Ivar had not returned. At that moment, Torkel was startled by a female witch sitting on the windowsill, who had been observing him, asking if he was still tracking that person. With a graceful leap, Ivar, disguised as Beatrice, landed softly in front of the green goblin. Torkel asked where Ivar had come from. Ivar, amused, confessed he had been watching Lepus and Dantalia, laughing crazily and claiming he had been observing them closely. Seeing Ivar's expression, Torkel thought he knew something significant, but it turned out to be an extremely interesting event at the square that piqued the green goblin's curiosity. Ivar suggested he might have underestimated his abilities, but he had still identified Dantalia's weakness, his love for Lepus. After sharing this, Ivar turned and asked Torkel to update him on Miss Payman. Upon hearing that she agreed to help, Ivar smiled contentedly and climbed into his own coffin. Simultaneously, mysterious and powerful purple rays appeared around the wooden box. Moments later, Ivar emerged from the coffin in his original form, an old man. He instructed Torkel to pass a message to her that he had been waiting for centuries and was ready to repay both principal and interest. 24 hours after the incident with Andromalius, life continued as usual elsewhere. At the magnificent castle, the announcement of the arrival of the first Demon King captured the eager attention of everyone present. The grand carriage halted, and an entourage of solemn guardians assisted a stunningly beautiful demon queen from within, who was none other than the illustrious Lady Payman. As she passed by the gathered crowd, who all bowed respectfully, she casually inquired about the arrangements between her and Ivar, only to realize she might have arrived a bit early. Meanwhile, another announcement disrupted the scene, proclaiming the arrival of the second Demon King, urging everyone to clear the way. Payman's attention shifted towards the source of the commotion, the boisterous carriage. In contrast to Payman's dignified descent, this individual did not wait for assistance, but rather kicked the carriage door open, complaining about sitting too long and discomforting his rear, while also critiquing an unpleasant odor in the surroundings. This was the 8th Demon King, Barbatos, the deity of dark magic and disease. The first thing Barbatos noticed was Payman, and it was clear that there was no love lost between the two, starting with exchanged glances followed by seemingly concerned inquiries about each other's well-being. Their exchange escalated into a verbal sparring match, only ceasing with the arrival of a third party. Annoyed by the interruption, Barbados turned to see who it was, and to his surprise, it was the duo of Dantalia and Lapis. The ordinary onlookers were astounded to see them. Lapis accidentally caught the displeased gaze of Payman, causing her some distress. However, Dantalia was unfazed. He smiled, knowing they were recognized, and reassured Lapis not to be afraid. The focus of Payman and Barbatos, who had been at odds moments earlier, now turned towards Dantalia and Lapis. Seeing this, Dantalia simply gave a cold laugh and told Lapis it was time to leave. On Walpurgis night, 30 minutes before arriving at the Grand Hall, Lapis and Dantalia were seated in a carriage on their way to the gathering. Lapis suddenly expressed her concern that she might not be able to attend, to which Dantalia sighed and inquired indirectly who would be his dance partner if she didn't attend, hinting he would be disappointed to go alone. Despite hearing this, she remained expressionless. Dantalia, seemingly unconcerned, turned his head away and asked if she was upset, then mentioned the previous day when he declared his love for her. He explained that he had said it out of necessity, not knowing her face was flushed with emotion at that moment. Eventually, Lapis explained that the Walpurgis night was meant only for demon lords and high-ranking demons, and as a half-demon, her presence might not be welcomed. Dantalia laughed, surprised she was worried about that, and confidently declared that from now on she would officially be his fiancée, so she should walk confidently by his side without fear, considering they were the most famous couple there, and should not let down those who were looking forward to seeing them together. Lapis was silent for a moment, then wondered what exactly he was thinking, as she had previously assumed his declarations of love were just a pretext for borrowing money. Today was crucial, as every move they made could potentially influence whether there would be war or not. She felt anxious thinking about the topic of this meeting and remembered the previous day's events, unable to comprehend how Dantalia could remain so calm. Upon arriving, Lapis hesitated and looked out the window, while Dantalia smiled, ignoring her protests and stepping out of the carriage first. He casually said that they needed to show their affection and extended his hand to help her down. Facing such a romantic scene, Lapis coldly declined. As soon as they stepped out of the carriage, they were confronted by two well-known demon lords, Payman and Barbatos. The two female demons clearly noticed them and watched as Dantalia approached. He bowed deeply in an extremely polite manner while introducing himself as the 71st Demon Lord. Barbatos was the first to react, visibly annoyed, grinding her teeth and calling him a lowly creature, demanding that he not speak to her in such a manner. Dantalia remained unchanged by this, instead becoming even more polite. He bowed deeply, apologizing, and began to utter sweet words that self-deprecated while elevating the noble status of the two female demons. His words were impeccable and his attitude was oddly calm. Barbatos noticed his composed demeanor, scoffed, and turned away, letting the matter slide. As she walked away, Barbatos couldn't help but laugh, amused that a low-ranking demon lord like him had remained unfazed in front of her in Payman. Then Payman spoke up, her voice blunt yet devoid of rudeness, and while making polite conversation about him, she turned her attention to Lapis standing behind him, boldly inquiring directly. Lapis knelt down and introduced herself as Dantalia's servant. Payman smiled lightly, telling Lapis that such formality was unnecessary, and she stepped closer, lifting Lapis's chin with her fan to reveal her beautiful face, and while smiling, she complimented her beauty. Dantalia, standing beside them, frowned slightly. Maintaining his courteous demeanor, he skillfully interjected, complimenting the unmatched beauty of Lady Payman. Payman, in turn, graciously complimented him on his handsome appearance. He politely responded that it was his honor. Suddenly, she leaned closer to him and expressed a desire to talk more, but mentioned she had to leave and promised a future meeting. After Payman left, Dantalia, smiling entreatingly, turned to Lapis and said it was time for them to fight. He suddenly noticed her unusually pale complexion and asked how she was feeling. Lapis exhaled deeply, lamenting that no amount of lives would suffice for her to endure the day. The banquet was held in a grand and majestic castle, filled with high-ranking demons dressed elegantly. As Dantalia and Lapis entered, he praised the venue but could not help frowning when he noticed the stares from the people around. He affectionately called her Lala and asked if she saw it too. She agreed, acknowledging the blatant and ambiguous stares from all directions. Dantalia covered his face, realizing that from this point forward, there was no turning back for them as all the demons present were watching them. Dantalia and Lapis stood together, warily observing their surroundings. He asked if she saw it too, and Lapis nodded in agreement. Despite the guests appearing engaged in their conversations, dining, or strolling around, they all kept their eyes on them. Dantalia sighed lightly, feeling like a rare animal trapped in a cage, wondering what was so interesting about them that garnered such attention, questioning if the demon's stares were ones of admiration for a rare creature or the covetous gaze of a beast before it devours his prey. Dantalia asked Lapis Lapis if everyone attending was associated with the company, to which she replied that she did not know, as only high-level managers had access to customer information. She then pulled out a guest list to check, noting that about 40% of the attendees were aligned with Payman's faction, another 40% were from Barbatos' side, and the remaining 20% were either followers of the demon lord Malbus or neutrals. Dantalia appeared to understand and pondered how many in the room might be the company's hunting dogs. He looked around, wondering how he would escape if he became a target. Suddenly, all the lights at the ball went out. As people panicked, a blue torch flared up, followed by many similar torches floating above everyone, illuminating the entire hall. A short old man with a cane slowly emerged from the darkness, welcoming everyone to the event and introducing himself as Ivar Lodbrok from the Kunkuska Company. His eyes were blood red with white pupils that were pitch black, and three connected, three-pointed stars were etched on his forehead. He proclaimed that he was the wealthiest individual in the demon world, an ancient vampire and the owner of Kunkuska. Dantalia smirked, asking Lapis Lapis to confirm if this was the man, and she affirmed, adding that it was because of Dantalia that she had betrayed Ivar Lodbrok. Dantalia laughed excitedly, thinking that the boss had finally made an appearance. Ivar Lodbrok also noticed the two of them, particularly his blood-red eyes locking onto Lapis Lapis. He inwardly cursed her as a mongrel, but also cleverly climbing to the position of a demon lord's lover, yet he was pleased that he would witness her downfall. Ivar Lodbrok, energized, shouted that the Walpurgis night had officially begun. However, before he could finish, Barbados interrupted him, calling him a nuisance and downing a bottle of wine. She crudely wiped her mouth, clearly showing her disrespect. She continuously hurled insults at the old man, calling him decrepit, smelly, and boring, even demanding more wine while she berated him. Dantalia silently cheered for Barbatos, and Ivar Lodbrok did not dare to object. At this point, Payman stepped forward, her comments clearly targeting Barbatos. Unfazed, Barbatos insulted Payman in return and threw her empty wine bottle at her without hesitation. The glass bottle shattered at Payman's feet, darkening her expression immediately. Barbatos pointedly told Payman that if she liked, she should go play with the horses at home rather than pretending to be high and mighty here. Payman, unable to restrain herself, sharply retorted about Barbatos' childlike appearance, suggesting that her immaturity matched her inability to understand basic etiquette. Barbatos, already hot-tempered, was enraged by Payman's comments, nearly ready to escalate from verbal to physical confrontation. Payman, not backing down, mockingly asked if Barbatos was angry now. Truly furious, Barbatos radiated an intense pressure, as did Payman, both high-ranking demon lords seeming ready to crush each other. Marbas intervened just in time to halt the farce, advising them to calm down. Payman and Barbatos, whose earlier bluster deflated like a punctured ball, bitterly turned away from each other without another glance. Marbas then politely requested Ivar Lodbrok to continue. Ivar Lodbrok responded, his laughter strained as he acknowledged Marbas' command, proving why he was worthy of being a demon lord. On the sidelines, Lapis Lapis noticed Dantalia's hands shaking as they clenched together, and she quickly inquired after him. It might have seemed like he was scared, but his eyes instead flared with a deep red fire, and he broke into a terrifyingly tight smile. Ivar Lodbrok then once again declared, under the tolling of a bell, signaling the auspicious time, that all the main figures were now present, and thus, the Walpurgis night was officially opened.